Most people throughout their lives get really good at making excuses. Have you ever realized that? Like, people get better and better and better at making excuses. The reason why is we start telling excuses from the time, we can start talking. Kids start making all these excuses from the moment they can say their first words. It's usually an excuse. And as they grow a little older, they'll tell parents, why they can't eat their veggies. They'll tell their parents why they can't go to bed, why they can't go to school, why they can't sit still, why they can't do anything that you tell them to do. There's an excuse for it all. But we grow older, we become much more mature and dignified, and then nothing changes. We continued throughout our lives to make the worst excuses. I found this, you're gonna love this. This was an article entitled Real Excuses People Have Used to Get Out of Dates. Now, if you're a single person, I want you to be writing these down. These are gonna help you in your life, and you don't have to thank me, you're welcome. Here's the first one. My dog has been suffering from depression, and I really think he and I need just some alone time together. I thought that was so funny. Second one, my friend is going to be on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and I'm the phone a friend, and you never know with these types of shows, they could ring at any time. The next one, the football season just started. I'll call you when it's over. I think that was Christian Talbot when he was still single. Another one, I need to change the air in my tires and the blinker fluid for my blinkers. Now, and this is my favorite one. Sorry, I can't go out tonight. I have to study for a blood test. There's all sorts of horrible reasons. These are real reasons that people have actually used to get out of going on a date. And for most people, we're used to giving excuses to get out of what we don't want to do. I don't want to do that, so I'm gonna come up with an excuse. Well, have you ever thought about what is an excuse? One definition of an excuse is the skin of a reason stuffed with a lie. I like that. Another definition is this one, a lie that's dressed up for dinner. That's another great definition, but really an excuse is simply a lie to get out of what we don't want to do. So when it comes to God creating you, making you for a specific purpose and a plan for your life, and God has designed you to fulfill that plan, and then he places a calling on your life to call you into all that he has for you, it should be no surprise to us, because we've had the habit of making excuses our entire lives, that we tell God why we can't. And all they are, in the basis of our excuses, is a lie to God because we don't really want to. But the funny thing about telling God our excuses is God knows the truth. And God knows what he could do with you if you simply said yes. And that's what we see in Moses' life in Exodus chapter 3. We left off with Moses running for his life from Egypt. The reason why is because once Moses became an adult, he was the prince of Egypt. But he left the courts of Pharaoh. And in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 24, it gives us some commentary. I'll read it to you. It says, Moses, when he grew up, he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to share the oppression of God's people instead of enjoying the fleeting pleasures of sin. He thought it was better to suffer for the sake of Christ than to own the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking ahead to his great reward. Moses, he left the courts of Pharaoh. He thought it would be better to suffer with his people than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. Moses sensed a call in his life, a call to something greater, not just to waste his life enjoying the treasures of Egypt, but there must be more to life. God has a greater purpose for my life. And so Moses went to be with his people. He thought he could help his people. He sensed a call even early in his life to be the deliverer for his people. But then Moses, he got ahead of God. Moses saw an Egyptian man, a taskmaster, beating an Israeli. Someone who was vulnerable and couldn't defend himself, and Moses was enraged at that, and so he took that Egyptian and he beat that man to death. He killed that Egyptian. And so Moses, realizing what he does, he buries the body in the sand, but the next day, two men of Israel are fighting among themselves, and so Moses goes to break up this fight and says, "What are you guys doing? Why are you fighting among yourselves?" And he goes, "What are you going to do? Kill us like you did that Egyptian yesterday?" And Moses realized that the truth was found out, that people knew and the word was already spreading. And sure enough, the word spread all the way back to the courts of Pharaoh. And so Pharaoh put a hit out on Moses. He was running for his life because of this murder, a capital offense that he did. And so Moses flees Egypt and he goes to Midian. And he finds a family in Midian, a man named Jethro and his 7 daughters. And Jethro brings him in. He ends up marrying the oldest daughter and becomes part of that family. And he's in the wilderness now for 40 years. 40 years ago, Moses thought, you know what? I'm a somebody. I can do something with my life. God's put a call on my life. But then he messes it all up. And now he goes out to the wilderness, far from where he was supposed to be the deliverer, where he first sensed that calling in his life. But now he's far from that, and he's given up. God can't use me after what I've done. God can't work through me because of what I've done. I just give it all up, and he just lives his life, and now he's 80 years old. And Moses has been in hiding for 40 years. No one's heard of the great Moses, the Prince of Egypt. Moses has been in hiding. He hasn't been on Twitter for 40 years. No make Egypt great again tweets. No posts on Instagram. Moses has been off the scene for 40 years. Moses most likely thought he was done. He's ruined his life. He's ruined his testimony. And God must be done with me. But we see that God is faithful to go after the ones who have gone away. And God calls Moses and shows him that he is not done with him. But in Moses, instead of jumping at the opportunity, Moses begins to make excuses. Let's take a look. It's Exodus chapter 3, beginning in verse 1. One day Moses was tending to the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led the flock far into the wilderness and came to Sinai, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the middle of a bush. Notice that the fire was inside the bush, within the bush. Note that. Moses stared in amazement. Though the bush was engulfed in flames, it didn't burn up. This is amazing, Moses said to himself. Why? It's also biblical to talk to yourself. Moses did it. So Moses says to himself, this is amazing. Why isn't that bush burning up? I must go see it. When the Lord saw Moses coming to take a closer look, God called to him from the middle of the bush. Moses, Moses. Here I am, Moses replied. Do not come any closer, the Lord warned. Take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground. I am the Lord, the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. When Moses heard this, he covered his face because he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord told him, I have certainly seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I have heard their cries of distress because of their great, harsh slave drivers. Yes, I am aware of their suffering, so I have come down to rescue them from the power of the Egyptians and lead them out of Egypt into their own fertile and spacious land, into the land flowing with milk and honey, the land where the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, and maybe some termites now live. And now, Look, verse 9. The cry of the people of Israel has reached me, and I have seen how harshly the Egyptians abuse them. Now go, for I am sending you to Pharaoh. You must lead my people, Israel, out of Egypt. Now Moses is far from where he would need to be used by God in Egypt. He ran from his calling because what he did, but God is faithful to go after the ones who have gone away. And now the Lord finds Moses where Moses is at. And the Lord appears to him from within a burning bush. Have you ever thought why God would choose a burning bush? Why not like a majestic cedar or an oak tree or something massive like a mountainside? Why just like a little bush? Because the burning bush is a picture of the ones whom God uses. It would be a picture to Moses. If God could use a bush, then Moses, I can use you. But it wasn't a picture just to Moses that day, but a picture to all humanity, as if to say, this is what I can use. I want you to write this down. Number one, God can use you. But I don't want you to write the word you down. I want you to actually put your name down. God can use, and I want you to write your name down so that you see that God can use you. You see, this bush was burning perpetually, and it caught Moses' attention. He was wondering why it didn't burn up. But this was just an ordinary bush, but something extraordinary was happening within it, inside of it. And this bush is a picture to you and me, all of humanity, that God uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things when they are filled with God. You see, in Acts chapter 2, we see that the Spirit of God, when the Spirit was poured out on God's people, it appeared as flames of fire upon their heads. They were filled with the Spirit, and they were empowered by the Spirit, and the Spirit appeared as fire. This fire is within this bush speaking to Moses. And as this fire is burning, a picture of the Holy Spirit speaking and calling Moses, so too, when you are filled with the Spirit, it doesn't matter if you're just an ordinary person. God can use you in extraordinary ways because it's never been about you. It's always been about what God could do through you. God uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things when they are filled with God. If the Lord can use a bush to call Moses or a donkey to speak to Balaam, then God can use you. In whatever it is that he has called you to do, God can use you. Number two, write this down. Not only God can use you, but number two, God can work through you. You see, the word for bush in our text in Hebrew is seneh, S-E-N-E-H, which means a thorny bush. This encourages me so greatly because you might think, like, what can a thorny bush do for God? And the answer is nothing. And the same thing is true for us in our lives. The question isn't ever, what can I do for God? The question that we need to ask is, what can God do through me? And the answer is anything if you let him. You see, Moses was 80 when he was called. 80 years old when he was called. Moses is now an older man, but it wasn't too late for him. And it's not too late for you. Now, I just want to speak to the older generation for a moment. And I just want to tell you, I believe the Lord put this on my heart to share with our older saints, our senior saints today, that God is not done with you. That God, and I'm trying not to look at anybody because then you're going to think, oh, Brenen thinks I'm old. No, I just want to let you know, God is not done with you. Just because you're older and maybe you don't have as much energy or as much strength as you had at one time in your youth, God is not done with you, that God still has a purpose for you and still wants to work in you and through you. God called Moses when he was 80. I don't know if you're over 80 or under 80, but it doesn't matter. God can still use you. Whether you're 80 or 70 or 60, God's plan is not over for you. Now, I want to talk to people that would consider themselves a little bit younger than being old. I know that's a wide category, but maybe you would consider yourself young. And I don't mean young at heart, but just young. I want to talk to you a little bit about this, and that is, don't wait till you're old to answer the call that God has placed on your life now. I remember when I was just starting in ministry, I started pastoring when I was 20 years old. And starting in ministry as a young age, I was also in a Christian worship band, and we had the opportunity to tour for a large portion of that time and play with some of the largest Christian artists. And I loved getting to be a part of that ministry and getting to go to different places and play in different stadiums. And I love music, and music is such a big part of who I am, and worship is such a big part of who we all are as believers. And so it was such a huge passion in my life. But I also was pastoring because I sensed a call in my life to communicate God's word. And so I was doing that, but I was also doing this, and it came to a point where I couldn't do both effectively. One had to give and the other would have to go. And so I would have to pursue one and let another go. And so it came to a point where I was praying, and I was literally contemplating just stepping away from pastoral ministry to continue to pursue worship ministry and with our band and continue to tour and continue to do all of that. And I was very close to doing that because I was playing with my best friends and enjoying life and having a lot of fun. And I was praying one day about what God would want me to do. God, what do you want me to do? And I think that's the most important thing in our lives, is to not say, what do I want to do, but God, what do you want to do with me? And I remember as I was praying, after the Lord just spoke to me, not an audible voice, but just impressed upon my heart, my mind. I had this thought come to my mind, and it was just this: what are you going to be doing when you're 50? Now, 50 was old when I was 20. The 50 is like young for me now. That's not too far away. But God said, what are you going to be doing when you're 50? And I thought about it. I'm like, I'm not probably going to be a drummer in a band still touring. I'm going to be pastoring your people, God. I'm going to be teaching the Bible. That's what I'm going to be doing when I'm 50. And God spoke to me and said, why wait to do what I've called you to then? Why not do it now? And with tears in my eyes, I had a meeting with some of my best friends and said, guys, I have to go. I have to go and pursue what God has called me to do. And I share that story with you today to say this: don't say, well, I'll get around to what God is calling me to do when I'm older. Maybe you're a young man or a young woman here today, and you would say, you know what, after I graduate high school, or after I graduate college, or after I get married, or after I have kids, or after our kids are a little bit older, and then I can, and then maybe after we are more financially secure, then I would be able to give more time to God, or after I'm done with my career and finally retire. And then once maybe we use our retirement and go on vacation a few places and do some traveling like we've always wanted to do, then I will. And then you'll find your life over before you're done making excuses why God couldn't use you now. Don't wait till then, whatever then is for you in your life. Do what God has called you to do now, and watch what God will do. Don't wait until your youth and energy fades to start serving God. Do what God has for your life now, and you'll see God come through. But Pastor Brenen, you don't understand. You see, in my life specifically, there's some reasons why God can't use me. I have some things in my life why God can't. Let me tell you, Moses had some reasons in his life why God couldn't too. Look what Moses says as he gives some excuses. Look at verse 11 as God calls him. Verses 1 through 10 is so powerful because God appears to him in a burning bush. He hears the voice of God and the call on his life. He tells Moses, and Moses is one of the few people that get like 5 steps ahead. Usually God only tells you like the next thing to do. But God spells it out for Moses exactly what he's going to do. He's going to deliver his people out of Egypt. He's going to bring them to a spacious land. He tells them exactly what land that's going to be, and it's done. He lays out the whole plan for them. And then Moses responds in verse 11 and says, as he protests to God, "Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt?" And God answered, "I will be with you. And this is your sign that I am the one who has sent me. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God at this very mountain." Excuse number 1, you can write this down. I don't have what it takes. Moses says, who am I? To go before Pharaoh? Who am I to be the person to lead the people out of Egypt? And it wasn't like humility. Moses was saying, you should find somebody else, God. I know that you have great plans, and this seems like a great plan, but you can't use me. I don't have what it takes. And if you think about it, it's not even that bad of an excuse. It's kind of true. Moses doesn't have what it takes. Moses kind of has a legit reason because Moses has been a failure. Moses has been a murderer. In many ways, if I was God, Moses would not be the person I would select to represent me. Moses wouldn't be like, okay, he's top on my list. If I can pick anybody, Moses is the all-star. Moses wasn't the all-star. Moses wasn't even the bench warmer. Moses was like the water boy. He was like the 4th stringer, like the guy that you would never want in the game to be the quarterback. Like, that's like putting your kicker as the quarterback. Like, you don't do that. Moses wouldn't be the guy that I would pick. But then I realized something. God chooses unlikely candidates to work through in the greatest ways. Not the people you and I would think that God would use. And he does that so he gets all the glory. A mastermind composer, someone that lived during the 1700s, one of the most well-respected violinists of all time, a man named Niccolo Paganini. This man was a brilliant mind. He's the guy that today every aspiring composer studies and wants to be like. There's a story of his life where he stood before an audience of thousands in a packed out auditorium. And as he was playing his violin in this solo part of this orchestra, standing before the audience, one of his 4 strings on his violin broke. But he continued to play beautifully, and then another broke. And then he continued to play until another broke, and he had only 1 string left. And then he continued to play this beautiful piece that blew people away as they stood in amazement of the beauty that this man could bring out of a broken violin with only 1 string. Once he finished, the crowd erupted in applause. And he said to the crowd, "Paganini and 1 string." And they continued to applaud and to cheer because they were so impressed with Paganini's ability to take a violin with only 1 string and make something so beautiful come from it. No one there would be saying, "Wow, what an amazing violin. I can't believe that violin is so good with only 1 string." No, the honor and the glory went to the master violinist who could take something so broken and make something so beautiful. The picture is obvious that God can take our lives. You might not be the 1st string choice. You might not even be the 2nd string selection or the 3rd. You're the 4th stringer. And God can take that and make something so beautiful and so perfect come from it. And by the way, that piece that Paganini played went on to be known as a piece called Moses. Moses, the fourth stringer, the last guy that anybody would ever choose to be used. But God chooses the most unlikely candidates to work through in the greatest way. And God doesn't choose you because of how great you are. God chooses the broken so that when he does something so great, people will see the great God, how great God is, not how great you are. You see, the people that God uses are the most unlikely candidates, the least qualified, the unlikely ones. Paul would make this point when he wrote to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 26. It says this, I'll read it to you. For you see your calling, brethren. That is, you're called by God. And that not many wise according to the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble are called. But God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise. And God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things which are mighty. And the base things, the Moses things, the bush things of the world, and the things which are despised, God has chosen, and the things which are not, to bring to nothing the things that are. God is looking for violins with 3 broken strings. God is looking for people that aren't the most qualified ones. And God chooses those people, not the smartest ones, not the most strong ones, but God chooses the weak ones and the foolish ones. Why? People think, oh, God chose me because of how good I am. No, actually, God chose you because of how stupid you are. Welcome to church. But God chooses you in the condition that you are and calls you to accomplish something that's so beyond you, so that when he does it, people know it couldn't have been you. There's no way that was you. There's no way you could have done that. There's no way that was possible. And then God gets all the glory. You see, you might have an excuse. God, I don't have what it takes. You might say, God, I'm 3 strings short of a 4-string violin, or I'm a couple eggs short of a dozen, or I'm a fortune cookie short of a Chinese dinner, or I'm a few tacos short of a fiesta platter, or I'm one twist short of a slinky, or I'm a few screws short of a hardware store, or a few fries short of a Happy Meal. God, I don't have what it takes to be who you want me to be. But that's who God uses. God uses those who don't have all that they need to do all that he would call them to do. God called Jonah, who hated the Ninevites, to preach to those very people. Gideon, who was a coward, to be a mighty man of valor. David, who was a shepherd boy, which were the outcasts from society, to be the king of Israel. Samuel, a commoner, but to be adopted by the priest of Eli and be the priest of Israel. The disciples that Jesus chose, a fisherman, a tax collector, one was even a politician. None of them were the theologians of the day. Nobody trusts politicians, so these men were prone to make mistakes, but nonetheless, those are the people that God chose. Ordinary, blue-collared, working people. Peter even had an accent. He was from Galilee. Galilee was the uneducated region, and so when Peter was talking by the fire after Jesus was arrested, they recognized his accent, and they even said, no, I know you said you weren't the one that was with Jesus, but your accent deceives you. Your accent gives you away, in other words. What she was saying is, no, we recognize your accent. You sound like a hick. You know, you're not one of the smartest ones. And Peter said, I ain't that type of person. Nope, not me. And Peter, with his hick accent, tried to deny Jesus again. That is who God chose. And God changed the world with those 12 men. God chose a boy who gave his lunch to God, 5 loaves and 2 fish to feed thousands. God chose Moses, a man who had nothing but a walking stick to call to deliver the people out of Egypt. And God chose a widow who gave 2 mites to be an example to people throughout all of history of someone who was willing to surrender it all. And throughout the Bible, God chooses people who are remarkably unremarkable. Nothing special about them. Ordinary people to do extraordinary things. What I want you to take away today, what I want you to understand today, is that all God needs to work miracles in and through your life is your life. Just a life that's completely surrendered to God. And God doesn't see you for what you are, but God can see his anointing upon you and what he can do through you. God will use you, but the question is, will you make yourself available to God? Because God uses ordinary people to do extraordinary things because of, don't forget this, simple obedience. Just saying yes to what God has called you to do. A mark of spiritual maturity is when a man or a woman says, "Here I am, God, use me." Are we the type of person that says, "Here I am, God, send me"? Or are we the type of person that says, "There they are, God, send them"? I don't know, God. I think that person would be great for what you want to do, God. So use them. Yeah, that's a good idea, God. And likewise, a mark of spiritual immaturity is when we attend church irregularly. Then we don't show up most regularly. And instead of when we show up, instead of saying, "God, use me," we say, "God, what can I get? What can you give to me?" God said through the prophet Ezekiel in Ezekiel chapter 22, verse 30, God says this, listen to these words, "I looked for someone who might rebuild the wall of righteousness that guards the land. I searched for someone to stand in the gap in the wall so I wouldn't have to destroy the land. But I found no one." God's looking for people whose lives would be fully devoted to him. God's looking for people who would completely commit their lives to him. And God is not looking for someone that has the greatest ability. But God is looking for someone who has availability. And it doesn't mean that you have more time in your schedule than somebody else does. No, because someone that has the heart makes the time. It's when you sense the call of God in your life to say, "God, my life is more than just working a 9 to 5 or building a business or buying another house or having this or having that. God, my life is more than that. I was created for a purpose and a plan. There's a calling on my life, and I'm created with special skills and abilities that only God put within me to use in the specific way of what God has called me to do. And so I have to be the one to do that. And if God doesn't have an answer yes from you, he'll find someone else to do it. But then you'll miss out on seeing what God would have done through you. God doesn't call the qualified, church. He qualifies the called. God doesn't call the equipped. He equips the called. God doesn't need the greatest ability. He wants your availability. And the greatest ability is availability. So all God needs us to say is, "God, I'll do it." What is it, God, that you want me to do? I'll do it. Whatever it is, God, you're calling me to do, I'll do it. And you can trust me in that. I will stay faithful to what you've called me to do. And all God needs to work in you and through you is you. Moses made the excuse, "Who am I?" And God would say, "It's not about who you are. It's never been about who you are, Mo. It's about who I am." And then Moses doesn't get the point. You think, after God would tell him that, he'd be like, "Okay, I'm sorry, I was wrong. God, okay, take me and use me." No, Moses keeps making more excuses. Look at verse 13. But Moses protested again. And next chapter, in chapter 4, we're going to see 3 more excuses. Moses is full of it. And Moses protested in verse 13 and says, "If I go to the people of Israel and tell them the God of your ancestors had sent me to you, they will ask me, 'What is his name?' Then what should I tell him? I mean, this is such a lame excuse. Like, God, if I go and, you could have just said, God sent me, but like, I don't know your name, and so I don't know what to say. And so God just so graciously deals with him and says in verse 14, I am who I am. Say this to the people of Israel. I am has sent me to you. And God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, Yahweh, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my eternal name, my name to remember for all generations. Now go and call together all the elders of Israel. Tell them Yahweh, or I am. It's the tetragrammaton. It's the abbreviation. No one really knows how to say God's name because it was so holy. When they would write God's name, they wouldn't even write the full name. They would take out all the vowels. And so tell him, I am, the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has appeared to me. He told me, I have been watching closely and I see how the Egyptians are treating you. I have promised to rescue you from the oppression in Egypt. I will lead you to a land flowing with milk and honey, the land where the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, and maybe some termites live. And the elders of Israel will accept your message. And then you and the elders must go to the king of Egypt and tell him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. So please let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. Moses, go to Pharaoh and say, we just want 3 days to go worship God in the wilderness. But watch what God says. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless a mighty hand forces him. So I will raise my hand, and I will strike the Egyptians, performing all kinds of miracles among them. Then at last he will let you go. And I will cause the Egyptians to look favorably on you. They will give you the gifts when you go, so you will not leave empty-handed. Every Israelite woman will ask for articles of silver and gold and fine clothing from her Egyptian neighbors and from the foreign women in their houses. You will dress your sons and daughters with these, stripping the Egyptians of their wealth. God gives Moses a specific plan, spells it all out for him again. Here's what I'm going to continue to do. I'm going to make this even more crystal clear for you. What does Moses say? Excuse number 2, write this down. I don't know enough. First, for his first excuse, I don't have what it takes. Now Moses gets a little more specific. I don't know what I need to know to be able to accomplish what you're calling me to do. Moses has been out of Egypt for 40 years. Moses wouldn't be able to relate to them culturally. Moses didn't know what the top dances were on TikTok to be able to connect with the Egyptians. He didn't know I walk like an Egyptian. He didn't even know that was their theme song at the time. Moses didn't know what the latest tracks were on iTunes or Spotify. Moses was depending on his own knowledge. I don't know what I need to know. But where did Moses' own knowledge get him in the first place? Well, he did what he learned in Egypt, and he took a man's life when he was doing something he didn't like. And God didn't call him for another 40 years, as if to let another 40 years go by so that Moses could unlearn for 40 years everything that he learned in Egypt for the first 40 years. As if it would just say, it took God 40 years to get out of Moses what Moses put into him for the first 40 years. Until Moses came to a point where he didn't even know anything that was happening in Egypt anymore. And now God says, I will use you. People think, if you're going to connect with that people group, if you're going to connect with that age group, you need to relate to them culturally. You need to try to dress like them or speak like them. And you won't be effective in the ministry if you're not relevant. You hear that a lot in church, a relevant message. It needs to be relevant. And if it's not relevant, you won't relate. But do you know that it wasn't until Moses had no connection to relate to the Egyptian people in any way that God said, I will use you? Because it wasn't about Moses' knowledge ever. It was simply about giving God's word. And God's answer is the same. Whenever we say, I'm not smart enough or I'm not capable, he says, I am. I am. In that day and throughout Jewish culture, your name represented who you were. They didn't give you a name based upon the sound of the name, or they liked, the name. It was a cool name. They gave you a name because of that was the meaning of who your identity was. And God would not give Moses a specific name because God didn't want to be limited to one description of who he was. You see, throughout the Bible, we're given all these names of God. God would say, I am El Shaddai, God Almighty, for those who need my strength. I'm Jehovah Rapha, the Lord that heals, for those that need my healing. I'm Jehovah Shammah, the Lord is there for those who are alone in their life and just need to sense my presence. I am the God who is there. I am Jehovah Jireh, the God who provides. For those that need my provision, I will be that to them. I am Jehovah Shalom, the Lord is peace. For when you go through times like 2020, when you have no peace, I am the God that brings peace. It was said that in the 19th century, or the 20th century, we had Bob Hope, we had Johnny Cash, and nowadays we have no hope and no cash. In the time that you have no hope, no peace, God is the God who brings peace. But God tells Moses none of those names. God just tells Moses, I am. And I'm ending with this now, but don't miss this. When God says, I am, that's it. Well, Moses says, well, tell me your name so I can tell the people who sent me. And God says, I am. And Moses would be like, you are what? I'm still waiting. And God says, I am who I am. Oh, that doesn't really help me. God, I can't just show up and be like, oh, who sent you? Who do you think you are? And I am sent me. What does that even mean? But God would be telling Moses, I am. And he leaves that sentence seemingly open-ended because God is saying, I am anything you have need of. Whatever you're not, whatever you need, I am. Let me be that to you. We say, well, you know what? I'm not very good. And God says, I know you're not, but I am. We say, I'm not very qualified to answer the call of God, and says, I know, but I am. I'm not very competent to be a parent. And God says, oh, I know, but I am. I'm not really certain how it's going to turn out. And God says, I know, but I am. I'm not really confident. God says, I know, I see you. There's nothing to be confident about, but I am. It's not about what you are. It's about who he is. And he is, I am. Listen, if you are a Christian here today, God has created you for a plan and a purpose. God has a calling on your life to be used by God. And you can go throughout your life giving God all the reasons, aka excuses, why you can't right now. I can't serve you, God, with my life right now. Why? Because, well, I have homework in high school, or, I got a lot of tests in college, or, I want to live some life before I really settle down, put my roots down and commit to the local church. Or God, you know what? I just got married, and because I just got married, I can't really, be consistent in serving you, God. Or now I have kids, and it's really hard, God, to get up early. And let me tell you, it is. It is really hard to get up early. It's really, really hard to get up early when you have young kids and to serve the Lord. And we tell God oftentimes, God, why we can't. Oh, God, I got to build the business. God, I got to, get my foot in the door. I got to work my way up the corporate ladder. Once I retire, then I will. Or once, I get to this point, and we can spend our whole lives making excuses to God why we can't. And God says, I will give you all that you need if you simply say yes to me. But it's our decision, because God won't force anybody to do all that he's called you to do. But it's your choice whether you're going to see the great things that God could do through you. As we're going to see in Moses' life, Moses gets to see God work in the most powerful ways that the world has ever seen, as he raises his mighty hand up and does the most mighty works that God has ever done throughout all of world history, Moses gets to be a part of it all because he simply said yes to God. Would you?